Hey guys, welcome back to the What Comes to Mind series. Today we are on episode 26, talking about fasting. Now, it is very windy, so today will be a challenge. Let's see. But back to the episode. Fasting. Why is it so important? Why is it so underrated? Now, in terms of fasting, it's actually termed depriving, abstaining, or refraining from some form of food or drink for a certain period of time. Now, these can range from being absolute, so completely no food or drink, to just having some sort of restriction in terms of how much calories you have. So one of the common terms we hear is the notion of intermittent fasting. As ever, I've got a timestamp in today's video, so please do check them out. Scroll through, do as you please, flip-flop, go back forwards, you know the drill. So while I try and cut through the wind patterns and try and get this video to you, let's talk about the different forms of fasting. So as you know, there are various forms of fasting, ranging from actual religious forms of fasting to fasting for athletes, fasting for people on certain conditions. And here are a few that I'll go through now. So number one, to start off with, we have the 5-2 diet. Now, there's a person known as Michael Mosley, who's a medic in the UK, somebody I've learned a lot from, I really admire. And he was actually talking a lot in the early part of 2000 about this 5-2 diet, which essentially works where for 5 days you eat what you want, no restrictions, and 2 days within the week you actually restrict the amount of calories you eat, so a form of fasting. So naturally on those fasting days you have around about 500 to 600 calories, but you don't go crazy when you have those 5 days where you actually eat what you want. So he actually termed that a break in the week. So for example, on Monday and a Thursday, hence the 5-2 bit, the 2 bit. Monday and Thursday was a good break on a weekly basis where you can have form of fasting, but not compromise the food that you may enjoy on a day-to-day basis. Eat what you want, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but just restrict yourself. So a form of fasting, a lighter form of fasting on a Monday and a Thursday. Now, the reason why this is really important and quite useful and beneficial for a large part is it's not too extreme. You get to eat what you want, but also it gives your body time to detox, to relax. And I'm going to be talking about this later on in the video, but this 5-2 diet gives that little bit of a balance. Eat what you want on those days, a little bit of restriction on 2 days. Not too bad. And it's something we can practically do. We don't need to invest in something, we don't need to add to something. We can just have a little bit of a break, 2 days in a week, carry on about our daily life. Quite simple, isn't it? Sometimes you just have to stop and look at nature. I've been in this park so many times, yet I'm still amazed at. Maybe I should do a nature video. Why don't we finish this video first, right? So the next variation is seen as its own variation, of course, but it's kind of seen as an addition to the 5-2 diet as well. And this is known as time restricted fasting. Now what that essentially means is that you have more of a schedule in the time you don't eat or drink and the time you do. Now, common basic rule of thumb is there's 16 hours of your fasted state and then 8 hours where you generally do. Now you can vary that depending on how you want to accelerate your fasting or take it easy, whether you want to have 18 hours and 6, 20 and 4. That's a lot of maths at the moment. So you can decide how accelerated or how at ease you want that fasting schedule to be. Now this next form, I wouldn't really class it as a variation of fasting, but because of its terminology I think it's useful to share, and they term it overnight fasting. Now, as with the time restricted fasting, you can essentially use that 16-hour period of where you fast overnight. So whenever you come across that terminology, know that it's probably the same as time restricted fasting. It's just been given a different name. Clever. Now another form is 24-hour fasting. So whether you restrict food or drink from lunch to lunch, dinner to dinner, or breakfast to breakfast, you can have a 24-hour for a fast. Now this is actually linked to people who do water fast. So they don't eat anything, but for 24 hours they will have a water fast. They'll drink water for 24 hours. And it's kind of like a cleanse as opposed to a fast. But one can argue it is a form of fasting too. So 24-hour fasting, also useful. There are also alternate day fastings where you may go one day you eat what you want, the next day you fast, and you can just go back and forth. So you see essentially it's probably a similar concept, but there are many variations, whether it's 5 to 2, whether it's the time restriction, whether it's 24-hour, whether it's alternate. You can have whichever works for you, because maybe your occupation, your health, how you like to eat may be tailored to a form of fasting. What works for you? So the question is, can anybody do it? And the common answer is yes. Unless you have a medical condition, unless you may be pregnant, unless you have some sort of requirements for certain foods, if you have certain medications you have to take all the time. Barring that, there is no prerequisite that you need this or that in order to fast. And I just went a bit London there, but the notion is that it is for everybody, you know, and that's one of the beauties of fasting. For example, if you are diabetic and you have to constantly measure and monitor your glucose levels, you know, fasting may not be as ideal, but seeking medical advice, finding out a form of fasting that may be benefit for you, you don't have to be as extreme, but this period of being in a fasted state can still be really beneficial. And the multitude and arrays of all different types of, you know, getting healthier, you know, losing weight, fasting is probably one of the most effective and easiest ways to do just that, and it's free. Now, one of the key parts of fasting is the food part, and there are 4 key kind of areas to focus on to give like a little bit of an umbrella understanding as to what we need to look at when we go about a form of fasting. So number 1 is caloric dense foods. You hear that? Caloric dense foods. And we want to look at the notion of making sure that when we are in that period where we need to eat, our stomach is not spending ages churning and breaking down large volumes of food. You want to have things that are small in volume but pack a real punch, so we're not spending so much time in that period where we have to eat something, so we've got more time in the period where we are fasting. Along with those caloric dense foods, number 2 is looking at fluid rich foods, and this is to really help keep our water balance nice and optimum, because naturally we can develop some forms of dehydration when we're going to large forms of fasting, and if we're not taking in water as frequently. Remember, we do take in fluids from foods, so we want to make sure our water balance is not being neglected when we go through forms of fasting. Now, this next part is related to fat loss, and I'll be talking about that next, but it's the notion of eating high quality fats, because essentially when you're going through a form of fasting, you are burning fats, and you want to train your body to get used to burning fats, getting more efficient to burn fats, so then you can use that as a really nice and clean energy source. You know, you heard of the notion of ketogenic diets, which I'll go to in a bit, but needing high quality fats is essential to have a really efficient and good form of fasting. And lastly, something that gets neglected quite often is vitamins and minerals. Make sure that even though we are restricting how much we eat or when we eat, we don't want to lose out on the vital vitamins and minerals that are essential for many physiological functions in our bodies. It's not just the proteins, carbohydrates and fats, it's also the vitamins and minerals we need to keep our body nice and optimal. So let's not forget those. Now, before I dive in further into many aspects of fasting, I want to take this moment to reflect on fasting beyond food and drink. Now, what do I mean by this? At the start of the video, I talked about the notion of abstaining, refraining, or depriving yourself from a form of drink or food. Now, you could take that kind of concept and extrapolate it further to other forms of our life. And I really feel fasting is not just about minimizing what you eat and drink so you can lose weight. There's a lot more to it. So I mean this concept and extrapolating to forms of luxuries that we have, and looking at it as a form of gratitude, that when we fast and abstain from other things that we're so used to, so whether it's some of our phones, if it's a TV, if it's some luxury items that we like to enjoy, if it's certain events that we go to, and abstaining from that as a form of fasting. So you can say it as a digital fast, a form of digital fasting. That can help us to practice the form of gratitude, which is so important in any walk of life. Irrespective of your background, your faith, your values, gratitude is paramount and universal. And I think, a form of fasting in that sense is a really nice way to think about how we can understand how grateful we are by stopping things that we naturally take for granted. I want to tell you a secret. really big secret about fasting. One of the biggest hidden truths. I did touch about it earlier, so that's if you were paying attention. That is, fasting is free. You don't have to pay anything. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to subscribe to anything, except for this YouTube channel. See what I did there? You don't have to go through some program. You don't have to keep buying a product. It's free. And that's one of the reasons we don't hear about it enough compared to something else. And that's why I really want to do a whole series about showcasing the latest research about fasting in relation to other diseases, improving aging, minimizing inflammation. There's so much of that I can't put obviously into one what comes to mind episode. But let me know in the comments whether you would like to see that, and showcasing a disease and how fasting has really benefited that over the past 2-3 decades. Because as I mentioned before in other videos, and I'll mention it again, and I won't stop mentioning it, is I am not here and I never will be here to sell information to you. I love researching and I love sharing information with you and for you. So just give me more opportunities to do just that, and I would be forever welcome. I'm forever thankful for ideas that you will share for me to do more videos, more high quality videos, more informative videos. So yeah, fasting on that concept. So now on to fat loss. One of the main reasons why people go through a form of fasting, whether you're trying to shed some excess weight or you're an athlete and trying to cut down to a certain type of body fat percentage for an event or for your actual training program. Now, to break it down simply so we can really understand, there are two parts to fat loss from a fasting point of view. Number one is increasing the time you are burning fat, i.e. that fatty state where your body has to use fat stores as an energy source to keep the body going. The more you can increase that period or increase that usage of fat, the better you're going to be in terms of reducing your weight and fat loss. And number two is all about minimizing the amount you store during the fed state. Now this is obviously the period where you start to eat something. Now the reason why this is so important, and to hit you with a little bit of science, is when you are fasting, your insulin levels over time actually reduce. So you're minimizing the amount the pancreas is secreting insulin and trying to reduce the diabetic burden that could actually happen. But because of that, your insulin sensitivity, so how primed your pancreas is ready to secrete insulin as soon as there's a chance, increases. So when you are finishing that fasting period and you start to eat something, what you eat at that point is incredibly crucial to what's going to happen in terms of your fat loss ability. Now, when you're eating carbohydrates and fats together, because the insulin sensitivity is so increased, you're going to start to store things straight away. So that's why it's really, really crucial to, one, increase the time you are in that fasted state, and keep an eye on what you're eating when you do start. So essentially really auditing what you eat as soon as you finish a fasting period. So going from, really refined sugar and high processed and deep fried foods are not going to be really important and beneficial for you after a fasting period. But as I mentioned earlier, eating high quality foods, caloric dense foods, fluid rich foods in that time is essential to have really maximal benefit and effects when you're in a form of fasting. So that's why those four topics I mentioned earlier are really crucial when you start to eat something in a fed state during your fasting schedule. Now moving on to a misconception, which is if I fast, I'm going to lose all of my muscle. Now depending on the type of fasting that you do, you could either harm your muscle mass or you can actually benefit that in some capacity. Now people know in terms of when you do forms of fasting, you can increase the cortisol levels, so your anti-inflammatory hormone. You can actually increase testosterone levels in an acute phase. And that's actually where fasting can really boost your ability to grow muscles. Now, from this hampering process that there is a misconception about, is if you do, for example, a routine form of fasting, so the 5-2 or the alternate day, that's 16-8 hours, you're not going to really harm the process that significantly, if any. But when you start to forms of increased extremities of fasting, so increased severity of fasting, you then may start to harm the ability to grow muscles. So it may not be optimal. Not mean that it's harmful for your body, of course not. But it's that if your real goal is to increase the amount of muscles that you have, increase the muscle fibers, and again, you can see here a whole video about strength, then you know that, okay, a form of fasting may not be completely ideal, But that's where when you're not training, you can have a form of fasting. Many athletes train in the morning on a fasted state. So that whole misconception that fasting is bad for muscle growth isn't entirely true. And I think incorporating a form of fasting in your muscle mass or muscle building regime can actually be really helpful in minimizing the excess fat that you might put on that may be compromising your muscle growth. And to add to that, there's a lot of research conducted on certain omega-3 fatty acids that can help preserve the cell membrane, so you can say the cell surroundings of muscle, to prevent it actually degrading. So something known as DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, is something that's been widely looked at to help preserve your muscle mass even in a fasted state. So I'll put a few articles below that you, if you want to, you can have a read about, to give you an idea of how fats can be useful for that, but also how fasting is not a detrimental impact to muscle. Now this next part I'm very passionate about, because fasting for health can really have a significant impact on the need and the burden of borderline medication. And what I mean by that is, if a person has a slight ailment, so maybe slightly high blood pressure, so hypertension, maybe pre-diabetic, so their glucose levels are a bit too high consistently, if they're left untouched and to their own devices, they may end up developing the actual condition that causes more problems. And a lot of the times, temporary, you can say, treatments are looked at, whether we know them as borderline medications, to try and suppress that actual issue. But I would argue that forms of fasting can reduce the burden of those medications, and in some cases reduce the need for those medications entirely. Now again, seek medical advice, of course, when you're on these certain medications, but why not also do the basics? I mentioned this in a detox episode, which you can see here, that why not try the basics that are free, that don't require you to buy expensive things, to go on expensive courses, and see how they work for you. There have been a multitude of studies and reviews, which I'll put in the description box, about the real benefits of fasting from a health point of view. Because I'm one of the biggest advocates to try and move away from this narrative of popping a pill to treat an issue. And not just because that may be harmful for you long term, but there are so much joy and benefits to enhance your body through a form of fasting. How you feel more energized, how you feel more fulfilled and more productive during a fasted state, because you're burning a more of a cleaner long-term energy source for that particular situation. So that's why I would say, again, if you're on certain medications, seek medical advice, of course, but give it a shot. Genuinely give it a shot. It doesn't cost you anything. Pick a one that is suited for you and give it a real good shot and see how you feel over time. Is it working for you? And I would say most likely it will. But let me know in the comments if you've got any kind of questions on how to go about form of fasting. What should I start with? I would love to help you. I would love the opportunity to help you. And ask me as many questions as you want, and I will do my best to answer all of them for you. And to really hit home why I'm such a big advocate of this, is one of the analogies I've used before in videos that I want to share again here, is that notion of a parcel service. And think of your body as a little warehouse. And when you're taking in foods, when you're taking in anything, your body has to stop everything and focus on that conveyor belt of food that's coming in. All of the body's processes has to look at that actually coming in. It doesn't have the time to look at other forms of the warehouse or your body that needs attention. It has to deal with what's coming in, process that, break it down, get it to where it needs to go. But when you're under a form of fasting, so when you're in a fasted state, that conveyor belt essentially stops. So everything in the body is like, okay, now I've got a bit of time to go and sort everything else out. So those boxes in that warehouse needs to be sorted, or this area needs to be looked at. So that refers to the different parts of your body that needs attention. So your body can focus on detoxing itself, healing itself, and that's why fasting is really useful as a form of becoming more healthy in a sense. And again, as I reiterate, it doesn't cost anything. It's free. So before I end the video, let's look at an applied setting of where fasting can really help from a health point of view. Now let's take Alzheimer's for example. Often seen as a neurodegenerative disorder, so whether the brain's kind of performance degrades over time through memory loss, through poor functions. Even though the cause is up for debate, for many years it was seen as just an accumulation of certain proteins in the brain that led to it. Other arguments about certain bacterial infections that cause inflammation, that leads to those actual issues. Irrespective of the cause, nowadays lifestyle management is a huge part of that, and fasting has been seen as a really useful endeavor, as a long-term process, or you could say a long-term intervention to try and minimize our risk of Alzheimer's. So we know about the whole notion of healthy eating, exercising, feeling good, and having good company as a form of minimizing neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's in particular, that isn't genetically inherited as a majority. Fasting has been really useful in being able to minimize our risk. And I put one or two review articles in the description box to really highlight how doing something that's free, isn't too intensive, you're not missing out on your food, can really help to minimize a risk factor for a very dangerous and debilitating disease like Alzheimer's. So everyone, hope you enjoyed today's video. Apologies that it's been a bit delayed since the last one, but I hope you did find it really useful. And to give you that little summary, sometimes it's not what you eat, it's actually when you eat. And that's where fasting really comes into play. That so many health benefits, so many useful features of fasting. If you did enjoy the video, do smash that like button. Do subscribe if you haven't done so already, so you can stay tuned with the series and check out the other 25 episodes of this series so far. I do hope you firstly benefit from them, and secondarily enjoy them, Well, stay tuned for episode 27, which I'll be talking about the new actual releases on COVID treatments. It was super windy and I've been here for 2.5 hours shooting this video, so I do hope the audio is great and also you firstly benefited from the video. But anyway, I shall let you go.